So the other day I was helping out someone with a coding question and they wanted to add a like button to their web page. And so I decided to go on the internet, do some Googling, and try and find a good tutorial to help them out with this question. This was meant to be a lower level, kind of just a basic HTML, simple JavaScript question. And so I went to the internet just to find something just because it'd be better than me trying to explain it. And I came across this. This is a guess not a tutorial, but kind of a write-up on Medium from a person who kind of explains a very basic concept of how to make a like button. And I was like, all right, looking over this quickly, looks pretty good. So I sent it over to the person as a help, and they were off and about. But as I started looking over it more closely, I started to notice some things that were wrong about it. And it was like, it wasn't bad at first, but the more I looked at the code, the more things wrong I found, and the more I was just not very happy with it. And I think I'm gonna title this video something along the lines of like how to code better, or like code better or do better code, something like that. And this isn't meant to be a kind of a how to write better code. It's more of like a call to action of like try and write better code, especially in this case. The reason why I'm kind of not very happy with this is just because this is a specific video meant to be a tutorial to newer programmers. And when you're working with newer programmers, you really want to teach them the right way to do things. You want to teach them the good habits, good coding practices, all that type of stuff, because when you're learning, that's when you're most kind of likely to pick up these good habits, these good things. If anyone else is a programmer for like 10 years like I am, picking up good coding practices is a lot harder because you do all the stuff you picked up when you first started to program. So when I kept looking at this, I kept seeing things wrong, and it's like I kept realizing how many things were in this code here that were just bad things to teach a new programmer. And because of that, I wanted to kind of go over this and kind of highlight everything I see wrong with this to kind of make a point of like what should have been done on this to be better. Again, especially because this is meant for newer programmers, you really should write and display the best code you can because you want to teach those good habits from the get-go. So if you want to try this yourself, here's the code right below. It's only like 10 lines of code, so the fact that there's something wrong with like every single line of this code is a pretty big red flag. But if you want to try this at home, pause the video here, look over this code, see how many things you can pick up. I have a list of 6 different things on my list here of things I see wrong with it that encompass nearly every line of this code. So yeah, shall we begin? Alright, so the first thing I saw that kind of initially got myself to start looking at this code more closely is these lines here. This like click and this whole function here. This is what initially got me to kind of start looking at this code more closely, because if you notice, you have a function variable. I don't know what the exact term in JavaScript is. I'd call it just it's a lambda anonymous function. That's what I'm used to calling it. But you notice that this anonymous function here has one function call inside of it, and that's to another function or another anonymous function. And whenever you see that, it should immediately have a red flag in your head of like, hey, I'm calling this function that's only calling one other function. Why do I not just skip the step and instead of calling like click, call increase like right away? So down here we're calling like click when the button is clicked. Why not just put increase like right there? You've now removed all 3 of these lines of code and condensed this from 10 lines to now 7 lines of code. I mean, obviously the person who wrote this is definitely a React developer. Given by how some of this is written, this is a very React style of writing things. And maybe this was taken from a larger project, and the fact that there was more logic here in like click, very possible. But it's still, at the end of the day, this code was chosen to be put into this. It's a very easy fix to just remove that code from this little bit here and just simply call the function straight up and have even less code there for someone who's new and learning to use and to better understand. There's just more complexity that's just not needed. The second thing that I saw wrong was basically right next to the whole like click bit, and that was this little click function here. Why there are parentheses around click, I have no idea. I've never seen that before. Every time I use the event listener, you just put the straight up click the word there. I don't know why there's parentheses around it. I've never seen that before. This is a very much of a nitpick, but it just was kind of so weird and out of place. Just it looked, I don't know. That's the one thing that first came up, was just why was there parentheses. The third one, this one is definitely not really a nitpick, and this is definitely something that should be really, really can use better, and that is the mix of semicolons and not semicolons on lines. Now, this goes into the whole consistency is key. Consistency and doing your code the same way every time is very, very, very big when it comes to programming. JavaScript, while most people do tend to put semicolons like this first line here or these two examples up here, it's not needed. You don't need semicolons in JavaScript for nearly everything. I mean, some cases where you do need it, but most code that you write that's very basic like this, you do not need semicolons. It's very much a personal preference. I do like semicolons when I write JavaScript, but the project I work on for my actual day job work, we don't use semicolons. So it's very much personal preference, but whichever you choose, definitely make sure you follow that choice and you stick with it for the entire project. This is where linters become very important, because linter will pick this up and will yell at you for, hey, you're missing a semicolon here, or hey, you do have a semicolon here when you shouldn't. So just the fact that this code has this mix literally right here is a big red flag, especially again for newer programmers who need to learn, hey, you should be using one or the other, not both. All right, the fourth thing here is definitely learning a good habit, especially when it comes to JavaScript. Previously in JavaScript, before was a ES6 or ES5, var was how you declared variables. It was var, the variable name equals something. That's how you did variables in JavaScript. But since then, const and let are now available in JavaScript, and those are kind of what you usually go to. And a good rule of thumb that I have at least learned from my work day job is that you should always use const first. You should push everything to be a constant. Just is a good coding practice. It just makes you have better code. And honestly, you realize you need let a lot less than you think you do. You don't actually need let as much. And const is just because of how compilers and stuff work, it becomes much more efficient to use those. The compiler is much better at handling those, can optimize a lot more than if you put it as a let. And because of this, they do that pretty well. Obviously, they use const up here for the query selectors, for finding the stuff in the document. And then they use a let here for like, which is good because the like is what's going to be changing. However, the one thing that they do miss, which kind of wraps this into a larger question of, they don't put a const by these increase like and like click. Now, this is where you can get to the whole concept of what's the best way to teach a newer programmer. I know the whole concept of anonymous functions and functions inside the variables can be very kind of complex or confusing to newer programmers. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, I'm a React developer. This person probably was too. So this kind of doing this way is like second nature to us. But it's the fact that they don't have const next to these is kind of a red flag to me, because it doesn't get across the concept to a newer programmer that these are variables. These are variables that are assigned to a function or assigned to an anonymous function. And when they don't do that, technically under the hood, these are assigned to be vars, which is a whole scope issue that it's probably a little too complex for right now. But you should have const in front of these, because these are variables and they should be constant because their value isn't changing. The value of that function they're assigned to is not changing. And again, you can get into the whole debate on whether or not they should have just written a function name that was called increased like and that does this logic. That's a very, a very valid solution. And definitely, I think I kind of agree with that for teaching newer programmers, to start with just functions, teach them functions, and then you get into the whole anonymous function, lambda or whatever. I don't know the technical thing in JavaScript for this is called, but then get into that and kind of explore that and how those work. So another thing there that, again, just newer programmers, it should have been done a little bit differently to help them understand a little more. All right, and then the last two are definitely just nitpicks. Again, when it just comes down to, the first one comes down to JavaScript, and web development recently has become very, very bloated in my opinion. I can get this whole tangent of how JavaScript and TypeScript and all this, I'm not the biggest fan of because of the amount of bloat that there is with Node. Node is the worst thing in terms of bloat and the amount of dependencies on they have. But anyway, that's a whole another video. But for me, a big goal that you want to get with your JavaScript coding is to really try and lower the amount of code you write, to really kind of lower your overall code impact or footprint, I guess it is. Use as little characters as you can, save what you can, just because, again, this is the internet and everything is being sent as a network connection. If you can lower your footprint, your code will load faster, It'll send over the network quicker. You know, it'll be quicker because you're writing less code and there's less of it for the client to load and to download and all that. So nitpick, yes, but this is a kind of a good thing to know for stuff like that, where it's, you know, little changes can have a big impact, you know, as you have more of those little changes. And that's just this line here of this get like num inner HTML. There's not a need to have this in this stringified version like this. If you don't know much about JavaScript, these backticks basically are another word for a string. But if you have the $sign and then the curly brackets, anything inside of that will be outputted like the variable. So instead of outputting like, it'll output whatever that like variable is set to. Just a whole kind of complex string and how that all works, like placeholders and all that. But that's just not needed. You could just put like there, and that uses 4 less characters in that line to just output a number. Again, nitpick, but when it comes down to having your code footprint be less, if you can do simple stuff like that where it's just not needed, you can actually help yourself out in the long run. My last point though for number 6 is just this simple like line. Why is there a space between the like and plus plus? It doesn't make sense. Why? Just I don't know. Maybe at this point I just got really nitpicky and just there were so much things wrong with it. I was like, why is there a space there? I don't know. But at any rate, those are the 6 things that I saw. Again, this whole thing wasn't necessarily to bash the person who wrote this. If you're the person who wrote this and somehow saw my video, there's nothing wrong with how you did this. This definitely works, and as a tutorial, it gets the point across. It's a good write-up, very concise, very short way of explaining kind of how to do the simple task. Maybe a little more explanation like how things work, like these query selectors would have been nice. Again, this should be a very beginner-friendly tutorial, but at the end of the day, this should have been done better though, especially because, again, it is a beginner tutorial. This code should have been written better because you do want to teach these new programmers the good concepts, the good programming basics and coding practices. So again, I don't know what to say about this. It's just basically a plea to say, write better code, especially when it comes to teaching people. Teach people the right things from the start. My code is bad a lot of the time, but there's a difference between your code being bad when it's kind of a personal project or for yourself, and when it's code meant for people to help learn and help teach. There's just things that have been done differently to help the beginners and people learning this better understand how to code than kind of throwing this at them. And yeah, it gets into the whole concept of like, is our code getting worse with, I don't know, actually I don't know where we're going with that, but I don't know. Anyways, I definitely do subscribe to the whole concept of there is no perfect code out there. There are some very specific instances where I think you could make a case for perfect code, but I very much do kind of subscribe to the concept of there is no perfect code. Software is meant to be grown and adapted and changed over time, and because of that, you cannot write perfect code, but you can write better code, and you can write good code, essentially. And it's just taking the time to develop the good habits, develop the good coding practices, and a lot of that comes from how you learn. When you learn on code that's not really the best for in terms of code practices, it really can affect you long term. So anyways, I've probably been rambling for way too long with this video. This was meant to be shorter, but anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys like this type of video and you want to see more about this, whether it's kind of reacting to bad code, that's probably not worse than something like this, or even just reviewing your own code. If you want to see videos of me kind of reviewing people's code, seeing what I see good and bad about it, let me know. Again, I'm very open to all of this, so let me know in the comments below what you guys think. But anyways, that's all I got from me. Hopefully I've helped inspire you guys or help kind of get my point across and why it's a good idea, especially when teaching people to write better code or show them the good code that you want to kind of teach them, I guess. But anyways, thank you for watching. See you guys later. Peace out.